Let's move on. Have a look at what's happening in the French newspapers. Flo's with us here on set. We're starting off with the Prime Minister Manuel Valls. He met with student unions yesterday, announcing a series of measures to try and boost youth employment flow.
That's right. He announced a series of 11 measures worth about between 400 and 500 million euros a year. So quite a package for students. And you can read more about it on the front page of Les Echos, the business paper, which is focusing on one measure in particular, and that's that Valls wants to tax short-term contracts, known as CDD here in France, more. This essentially to encourage companies to hire young people on long-term contracts, known as CDI, contrat de durée indéterminée. Now, officially, all these packages are about boosting youth unemployment, but papers unanimously agree that what it's really about is quelling this growing anger over the government's plan to reform the labor code. We've been hearing a lot about these protests over the past couple of weeks, and that's what Les Echos says on its front page. You can see they've used this word cajoler la gauche. Essentially, he's trying to rub the left the right way with these measures.
And looking inside the paper in Les Echos, you found their editorial accusing the government of throwing money at the problem here to try and hush up its critics.
That's right. Les Echos is very harsh towards the president today and says it seems like 1 year away from the presidency, surprise, surprise, the president has suddenly remembered one of his campaign promises, which was to make young people a priority during his presidency. And it seems like the government is just handing out cash to really win back disappointed voters. That's what Les Echos says. Have no doubt, François Hollande wants to run for president again, despite his record low approval rating and his glaring lack of results, which is becoming quite a trademark for him. So very harsh words, as you can see in Les Echos.
And the Catholic paper, Le Quell, they're very dubious, aren't they, about the whole sincerity, really, of the government?
That's right. It's hard to believe that the Prime Minister is sincere when he says that this package of measures is just aimed at addressing deep concerns and anxiety within society. La Croix says, no, this is really about putting out a fire, essentially. And it's critical of what you can see it calls the useless bartering that's going on with these student protesters, which is essentially just highlighting the government's weakness. According to La Croix, its authority is completely eroding with all this negotiating it's doing. By making so many concessions, it's warping its original program, which was to change the labor code to make it easier for these young people to get jobs. And all the government is doing is leaving a bunch of obstacles for them to jump over.
And unsurprisingly, perhaps the right-wing press very outraged over the government's concessions.
That's
here.
right. Surprise, surprise. Le Figaro once again lashes out at the government for breaking a promise. It had promised to push this reform all the way through, but 7 weeks later, here we are, another humiliating defeat for the government. So harsh words for the government, but even harsher words for the young people that are demonstrating against the government right now. We've been talking a lot about the Nuit debout, up all night movement. Well, you can see in this article, it lashes out against the group's lack of diversity, in fact. It says that the people that are protesting are mainly long-term students, not long-term job seekers. They tend to be wealthy city dwellers, not so much people from poor suburbs. So it's an interesting take from Le Figaro. It says that the government essentially is caving into the wrong youth. It likens it kind of to one of those mirrors that you can find in a carnival that kind of warps the image of youth. And you can see Le Figaro says that this warped image of youth has completely hypnotized the government. So harsh words in Le Figaro, harsh words as well if we go back to L'Opinion in their editorial. They talk about the humiliating and mortifying abdication from the government.
Flo had a surprise from Le Figaro. Another surprise now, because they do have their fans, this movement as well. Communist paper L'Humanité.
That's right. As you can imagine, they love what's happening in many parts of France. You can see here on the front page, Nuit debout, politics is taking up the whole space quite literally, because one of the interesting things about this movement is that people quite literally take over public space in central parts of many big cities across France, including, of course, here in Paris, Place de la République, really in the heart of the capital. It's been completely taken over by this movement, even though police evicted them yesterday morning. They came back in full force over the evening, and L'Humanité is very thrilled about what it's seeing here. Now, Le Parisien is also reporting on this Nuit de Beau movement. You can see they're all thinking that these concessions that the right is so upset about, well, they think it's not enough, and they are calling for the government to completely abandon the labor reform altogether. And you can see this quote from one of the demonstrators in Place de la République. Valls is giving us crumbs, essentially, but we want the whole sandwich.
And finally, Place de la République, you mentioned it there. I live just along the road, in fact. L'Opinion has an interesting piece about the symbolism of it, so I'm interested in it.
That's right, the tormented history of Répu, as it's known here in Paris. Fascinating read if you want to know more about the history of Place de la République, which really, since François Hollande became president, has become all the more so a symbol. A lot of this has to do with the fact that it was refurbished shortly before his presidency, and so it's become a space free from cars and full of people.
OK, Flo, thank you very much. Flo with the papers here on France 24. Back with you in a couple of minutes' time.